Are you looking for an insightful walkthrough of the STAAR 2023 ELA test? In this video, I will break down the revising and editing questions so you know the correct answers, correlating TEKS, and rationale explaining why the answer is correct. You can also easily navigate through this video using the chapters. Hi there, I'm Angela from Custom Classroom. Just a quick reminder, I'm not affiliated with TEA or STAAR. As a test prep writer and educator, I'm here to offer my interpretation and insights. Before I break down the test, I want to share some news. I just released a 12-week set of editing and revising warm-ups, and the best part is you can try 1 week for free. These practice questions mimic exactly what your students will see on the STAAR test, ensuring they are fully prepared to ace the exam. Click the link in the description and give it a try today. All right, now let's look at the 5th grade reading released test for the editing section. So I went ahead and skipped to question 34 because that's where the editing part starts. So let's begin with the passage. Read the selection and choose the best answer to each question. Penelope is writing a paper, tell about the parts of the human brain. Read this paragraph from the body of Penelope's paper and look for corrections she needs to make. Then answer the questions that follow. The parts of the brain. The next part of the brain is very important. It is known as the prefrontal cortex, or PFC, and it lies right behind a person's face. According to scientists, the PFC is responsible for higher level thinking skills. It gives people the ability to analyze and compare. As a result, people use this part of the brain to make decisions, solve problems, and achieve goals. However, that's not all the PFC does. This part of the brain also brings thoughts and feelings together, shaping a person's behavior around others. The PFC helps people control emotions such as anger and fear so they can act in ways that are socially acceptable. All right, question 34. What change is needed in sentence 2? So let's look back at sentence 2. It is known as the prefrontal cortex, or PFC, and it lies right behind a person's face. So let's go through each choice here to see what error is needed to be caught. So change known to new. Changing known to new would introduce the wrong verb in this sentence, so that's incorrect. And it can help students to sometimes be crossing off. B, delete and. Well, and is an important coordinating conjunction that's needed to combine these ideas together. So without it, it wouldn't make sense. So let's get rid of that one. C, change lies to lying. So it would lying right behind a person's face. So lies changing to lying, the writer would also need to include a helping verb as is. It's not correct as it is. So that one is also incorrect. So D, change persons to persons. So here it says right behind a person's face. So this one is correct. D is correct because a person in this situation is possessive in the context. So an apostrophe is needed. So this one is labeled as 11DX, which is punctuation standard. All right, let's look at 35. What change needs to be made in sentence 5? So let's look back at sentence 5. As a result, people use this part of the brain to make decisions, solve problems, and achieve goals. So let's look at A here. Change use to use. People used this part of the brain. Well, the tense used is correct. So by changing it to use, that's kind of inappropriate context in the past. So that one is incorrect. B, delete the comma after decisions. So here there's decisions, problem solving, and achieving goals. Well, if you delete this comma, that's incorrectly dividing items in a series, so that is also incorrect. And C, change problems to problems apostrophe S. So here solves problems. Problems is not possessive in this sentence, so an apostrophe is not necessary. So that one is also incorrect. And let's look at D, change achieve to with EI to achieve IE. So here, this is correct because achieve is spelled incorrectly in the sentence. Now, a little trick for your students if they have struggle here, they can always go back into the passage here and they can take this word and they can stick it into the dictionary. And if they stick it in to the dictionary as it is exactly spelled, achieve, then you're going to see that nothing's found. And if they type in what it's being changed to, the I before the E, then they'll see it pop up. So that can be a huge help on a question like this that's labeled BI. This one's interesting because on the answer key, they have it labeled as 2BI. I would label this one as a spelling standard, which is actually 11XI. All right, let's go on to 35. What change needs to be made in sentence 7? So let's look back at sentence 7. This part of the brain also brings thoughts and feelings together. So let's look first at A. Insert it after brain. This part of the brain, it also brings thought. So this part of the brain serves as the subject of the sentence, so it does not make sense to add because it's incorrectly repeating the subject. B, change brings to brang. So the brain also brang thoughts. Well, brings is the appropriate form of to bring in this sentence. So brang is not the right tense here. So that one is also incorrect. C, delete the comma after thoughts. So here brings thoughts and feelings. Well, this makes sense because a comma after thoughts is not necessary because it's creating a punctuation error because this isn't a complete thought here after the ands. So that one is probably our answer, but let's keep going. Change feelings to feelings. So EE versus EA. Well, this EA is incorrect spelling. Again, you could have your students go in, type that in, and just double check themselves if they're at all worried and see nothing's found. So that one is incorrect. So here the answer is D, we don't, an unnecessary comma. This question is labeled as 11DX, which is a punctuation standard. All right, let's look at 37. Sentence 8 is written incorrectly. Select the response that corrects this sentence. So let's look at sentence 8. Shaping a person's behavior around others. So this is an example of an inline choice, and we're going to have to fix just one part of the sentence. So we're going to try to see shaping is the incorrect word here. So, or is it to shape a person's behavior around others? So to shape a person's behavior around others. This correction creates kind of a fragment and it removes the subject. So that's not correct. For shaping a person's behavior around others. This correction removes the subject again, creating a fragment. It shapes a person's behavior around others. That makes the most sense because that is adding the subject into this with the predicate, but shapes a person's behavior. And starting the sentence this way makes it incomplete because, again, there's no subject. So we need it to be it shapes. So this question is labeled as 11DI, which is looking at complete sentences and making sure that you are avoiding any fragments. All right, so this ends this section of editing, but if you want a couple more examples of editing questions, you can go on the 5th grade test, and there are 4 more questions related to editing. All right, now let's look at the fifth grade reading release test from 2023, the revising section. So I skipped here to question number 26, where it starts the revising portion of the test. So let's begin with the passage. Read the selection and choose the best answer to each question. Krista wrote this paper about a mistake she made. Read Krista's paper and look for revisions she needs to make. Then answer the questions that follow. Owning up. When I walk into school each morning, I go straight to my classroom and set my backpack down. Miss Kessler is working at her desk and I say hello. Then I head to the cafeteria for breakfast. Today, when I went into the classroom, Miss Kessler wasn't there. I assumed she was making copies or getting a library book. I had always been curious about what she does at her desk in the mornings. I wandered over to take a peek. I leaned over my teacher's desk and saw some papers, her coffee, and a tiny bag of candy. I hoped the candy was for a science experiment or math assignment. I stood up straight. My backpack knocked Miss Kessler's coffee mug onto the floor. I gasped. Her coffee spilled and the handle cracked off the mug. I immediately felt sick. As nice as Miss Kessler is, I knew she would be disappointed about spilled coffee, a broken mug, and a student snooping around her desk. Many possibilities ran through my mind. I could start cleaning up the coffee, or I could wait for Miss Kessler and own up to my mistake. However, I really didn't want to admit what I had done. I set my backpack down and scurried to the cafeteria. My friends chatted away, but I was lost. I couldn't stop thinking about the broken mug and my teacher's disappointment. Ding, the bell rang. I headed for my classroom. When I walked in, I saw Miss Kessler kneeling on the ground with paper towels. She told us to start our morning journals and that she would be with us shortly. I stared at my blank notebook page, wishing I had cleaned the coffee up for her. I felt dishonest for running off. As nervous as I was, I knew I had to tell the truth. While the rest of the class wrote, I walked up to Miss Kessler's desk. My voice was shaking as I told her what happened. I apologized for snooping around and knocking her coffee over. She listened and then a hug for me. She said, Krista, everyone makes mistakes. The important thing is to be honest about them. And it always feels better to do it right away. Miss Kelsler was right. I knew I would make a different mistake in the future. And as hard as it would be, I promised myself I would handle that mistake differently. I would tell the truth immediately. All right, so here is really important in revising that students actually read and comprehend what the text is about, because that is important in some of these decisions. So let's look at question number 26. What is the most effective transition to add to the beginning of sentence 2? So let's look back at sentence 2. And it says, Miss Kelsler is working at her desk and I say hello. So it's important with the transition to also look at the sentence before to see how they're going to link together. When I walk into school each morning, I go straight to my classroom and set my backpack down. Miss Kessler is working at her desk and I say hello. So if we say, likewise, Miss Kessler is working at her desk, that is comparing an action to what the writer does with likewise, which doesn't make sense. Let's look at B, usually. Usually Miss Kessler is working at her desk. Well, here the rationale says that in sentence 4 of the paragraph, the writer explains that Miss Kessler is not at her desk. So it makes sense to start the sentence 2 with the word usually to set that distinction. So here we're having to think back to later on in comparing. So this is correct. Let's look at specifically. Specifically, Miss Kessler is working at her desk. Okay, that doesn't make sense in this context. Nevertheless, Miss Kessler is working at her desk. Again, that's not really comparing correctly. So the most effective transition here is usually, because we're comparing to a context later on. So this question is labeled as 11BI, which is looking at the organization and specifically transitions. 27, what is the most effective way to combine sentence 10 and 11. Okay, so we're looking 10 and 11 and how they're going to be combined. I stood up straight. My backpack knocked Miss Kelser's coffee mug onto the floor. As I stood up straight, my backpack knocked Miss Kelser's coffee mug onto the floor. So here this sounds pretty good, so I'm going to select that and keep going. B, while I stood up straight with my backpack, I knocked Miss Kelser's coffee mug and onto the floor. Well, it's unclear what they're talking about. It then ending with the and onto the floor is just adding more repeat into the sentence, so that doesn't make sense. So let's get rid of that one. C, I stood up straight and knocked my backpack and Miss Kelser's coffee mug onto the floor. So in this revision, by adding and separating this, I stood up straight and then I did this and I did that, is also not adding to a more fluid sentence. So let's get rid of that. D, I stood up straight and my backpack knocked and bumped Miss Kelser's coffee mug onto the floor. All right, so this one, by adding that kind of knocked and bumped, we're being redundant and it's not necessary to add in these extra words. So for this example, as I stood up straight, my backpack knocked Miss Kelser's coffee mug onto the floor is the best choice. This question is labeled as 11C, which is revising to improve the sentence structure and kind of flow of the sentence. And sometimes this is required by combining. 28, the word lost is not the right word for sentence 20. Which word should replace lost in this sentence? So let's look back at 20 here. My friends chatted away, but I was lost. So here we have to think about the context of her mind will not stop thinking about what's going on and what had happened before. So lost isn't quite correct here, but is dreamy right? Well, dreamy could be a positive thing, lost in a dream state. So that doesn't connect with what's happened in this scenario. She was fascinated. Well, she's definitely not fascinated about her mistake. She's dwelling on it and super worried. So that one is not correct. Clueless. Clueless and lost are kind of similar, meaning she's confused, but she's not confused. She's like super worried. Okay, so let's look at D, distracted. Yes, that sounds the best because here it says the writer states that she couldn't stop thinking about her mistake. So she's clearly distracted, and when her friends are talking about other things, she can't stop thinking about this mistake. All right, 29. Sentence 32 needs to be revised. In the box provided, write this sentence in a clear and effective way. All right, sentence 32, let's look at it. She listened and then a hug for me. She listened and then a hug for me. So I like to usually start by typing the sentence because many times in this revising, it's just reorganizing the words into a more of a fluid sounding sentence. All right, so here we have the sentence. She listened and then a hug for me. So TEA has not come out with their exact scoring guide breakdown for what they accepted as the correct answers for these, but based on my previous knowledge, I would say here we're going to just have to reorganize this sentence. So she listened and then hugged me. So here we can see listened is past tense. And so following up with she's doing two things. She listened and then hugged me makes the most sense here. Get the correct tense and correct flow in the sentence. This one is labeled as 11C again, because we're really just organizing the structure so that everything flows a little bit better. So this is the final question in this section of revising. If you want to have some more examples for revising, if you go on to the next portion of the test for 5th grade, there are 4 more revising questions you can take a look at. Make sure you don't miss out. Click the link in the description now to get a whole week of my amazing editing and revising warm-ups for free. Don't wait. Grab this incredible opportunity while you can.